Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Okay, students, uh, this is our fifth lecture on postmodern fiction. In our previous discourse, we have discussed the character presented in 100 Years of Solitude and their narratives. And in this lecture, we are going to discuss the themes and motives of the delimited novel. And in this lecture, we are going to discuss the postmodern themes and motives of the delimited novel. So in this regard, we have the outline of the today's lecture is the themes, the subjectivity of experienced reality, the inseparability of past, present and future, the power of reading of language, and in motives we are going to discuss the memory and forgetfulness, the Bible, the gypsies. Students' themes are the fundamental and often universal ideas explored in a literary work. So, the first postmodern theme of 100 Years of Solitude is the subjectivity of experienced reality. Students, although the realism and magic that 100 Years of Solitude includes seem at first to be opposite, they are, in fact, perfectly reconcilable. Both are necessary in order to convey Marquis's particular conception of the world. Marquis's novel reflects reality not as it is experienced by one observer, but as it is individually experienced by those with different backgrounds. These multiple perspectives are especially appropriate to the unique reality of Latin America, caught between modernity and pre-industrialization, torn by civil war and ravaged by imperialism, where the experiences of people very much vary much more than they might in a more homogeneous society. Students, magical realism conveys a reality that incorporates the magic that superstition and religion infuse into the world. Students, this novel treats biblical narratives and native Latin American mythology as historically credible. This approach may stem from the sense held by some Latin American authors that important and powerful strains of magic running through ordinary lives fall victim to the Western emphasis on logic and reason. Students, you must keep in your mind that if Garcia Marquez seems to confuse reality and fiction, it is only because, from some perspectives, fiction may be truer than reality, and vice versa. For instance, in places like Marquez's hometown, which witnessed a massacre much like that of the workers in Macondo, unthinkable horror may be a common sight. Real life then begins to seem like a fantasy that is both terrifying and, and fascinating. And Marquez's novel is an attempt to recreate and to capture that sense of real life. Students' postmodern fiction discusses separability of past, present, and future. From the names that return generation after generation to the repetition of personalities and events. Time in 100 years of solitude refuses to divide neatly into past, present, and future. For instance, Ursula Curon is always the first to notice that time in Nakondo is not finite, but rather moves forward over and over again. Sometimes this simultaneity of time leads to amnesia when people cannot see the past any more than they can see the future. Other times, the future becomes as easy to recall as the past. The prophecies of the author prove that events in time are continuous. From the beginning of the novel, the old gypsy was able to see its end as if the various events were all occurring at once. Similarly, the presence of the ghosts of the author, Jose Arcadio Buendia, shows that the past in which those men lived has become one with the present. Students, in our first lecture, we have discussed literature as a defined language as well. So, in this regard, we have to discuss in postmodern fiction, you may know the power of reading and of language. Students, although language is in an unripe Garden of Eden state at the beginning of 100 years of solitude, when most things in the newborn world are still unnamed, its function quickly becomes more complex. Various languages fill the novel, including the, the local language that children learn, the multilingual tattoos that cover Jose Arcadio's body, the Latin spoken by Jose Arcadio Buendia, and the final Sanskrit translation of the author's prophecies. In fact, this final act of translation can be seen as the most significant act in the book, since it seems to be the one that makes the book's existence possible and gives life to the characters and story within. Students, as Garcia Marquez makes reading the final apocalyptic force that destroys Macondo and calls attention to his own task as a writer. He also reminds us that our reading provides provides the fundamental first breath to every action that takes place in 100 years of solitude. While the novel can be thought of as something with one clear, predetermined meaning, Garcia Marquez asks his readers to acknowledge the fact that every act of reading is also an interpretation, and that such interpretations can have weighty consequences. Aureliano too then does not just take the manuscript's meaning for granted, but in addition, he must also translate and interpret them and ultimately participate the destruction of the town. Students, motifs are recurring structures, contrasts, or literary devices that can help to develop and inform the text's major themes. So, in this regard, memory and forgetfulness is a very important motif of 100 Years of Solitude. Students, while the characters in 100 Years of Solitude consider total forgetfulness, a danger, they ironically also seem to consider memory a burden. About half of the novel's characters speak of the weight of having too many memories, while the rest seem to be sleeping sickness. For instance, Rebecca's overabundance of memory causes her to lock herself in her house after her husband's death and to live there with the memory of friends rather than the presence of people. For her, the nostalgia of better days gone by prevents her from existing in a changing world. The opposite of her character can be found in Colonel Aureliano Buendia, who has almost no memories at all. He lives in an endlessly repeating present, melting down and then recreating his collection of in his collection of little gold fishes. Nostalgia and or sleeping sickness are the dual diseases of the Buendia clan, one tying its victims to the past, the other trapping them in the present. Thus, afflicted the Buendias are doomed to repeat the same cycles until they consume themselves and they are never able to move into the future. The next important motif is the Bible. 100 Years of Solitude draws on many of the basic narratives of the Bible, and its characters can be seen as allegorical of some major biblical figures. The novel recounts the creation of Macondo and its earliest Adamic days of innocence, and continues until its apocalyptic end with the cleansing flood in between. You can see Jose Arcadio Buendia's downfall, his loss of sanity as a result of his quest for knowledge. He and his wife Ursula Guron represent the biblical Adam and Eve who were exiled from Eden after eating from the tree of knowledge. The entire novel functions as a metaphor for human history and an extended commentary on human nature. On the one hand, their story, taken literally as applying to the fictional Buendias, evokes immense pathos, but as representatives of the human race, the Buendias personify solitude and inevitable tragedy, together with the elusive possibility of happiness as chronicled by the Bible. Students, gypsies are present in 100 Years of Solitude primarily to act as links. They function to offer transition from contrasting or unrelated events and characters. Even few years, especially in the early days of Macondo, a pack of wandering gypsies arrives, turning the town into something like a carnival and displaying the money that they have brought with them. Before Macondo has a road to civilization, they are the town's only contact with the outside world. They bring both technology, inventions that the author displays, the Melquiades displays, and magic carpets, and other wonders. Students, in this regard, gypsies serve as versatile literary devices that also blur the line between fantasy and reality, especially when they connect Macondo and the outside world, magic and science, and even the past and present. Okay, students, we have to discuss the characters, the stories, the post-modern themes and motives to understand the post-modern culture and language in 100 Years of Solitude. You must read the text of the novel, and I'll assign you people in next class to write, to find out the post-modern element in 100 Years of Solitude. Okay, students, see you in next class.